Welcome to Book Time with Ryan. I am Ryan, and today I'll be talking about Buddy Levy's Labyrinth of Ice. And I thought, what better way to depict a labyrinth of ice than going outside? And I think it's called Storm Irma, the snowstorm that's hitting the East Coast. Well, basically hitting half the country right now. So I'm in my warmest coat, the bear coat, which is perfect because the Coast Guard cutter, or revenue cutter bear, makes an appearance in this story. This story is true. It's set in 1881 to 1884, and it details the Greely Expedition. Adolphus Greely, first lieutenant in the Signal Corps of the Army, set out with a group of men to participate in the first Arctic year in Greenland and Canada, an area called Ellesmere Island, or it was called Grinnell Land at that point. So this started in 1881. The idea was they were going to be brought to an area that was free of ice during the summer. They were going to find a place to camp and then take different readings, meteorological, magnetic, weather. That's meteorological, isn't it? Chart different places, just get an idea of what's there, and possibly make it as far north, maybe even to the North Pole, which had not been done at this point, 1881. Then there were going to be certain areas along the coast, and this is the official name for the group was the Lady Franklin Bay Expedition, named after Lady Franklin, who was Franklin who died looking for the Northwest Passage many years before. So the idea was that they were going to spend 3 years at this base that they were building, base being like a longhouse with prefabricated building. And then they were going to take these readings. There were, I think, 25 total. We'll skip to the end. Out of the 25, only 6 lived to leave, and one of those died almost immediately after he was rescued. People are rescued here, but there are a lot of things that go wrong before that. They are there from 1881 to 1884, and then in 1884 they finally are rescued. Now, the idea was that they had enough food at their place they called Fort Conger, which is really far north, to last, I think, a couple years. And then there were going to be other areas, cairns, that would have food and resupply stuff available, and that they could go and get more food if they needed to, and supplies on the way down. Basically, they were spread out so they could travel down the coast and get to a place where there was going to be open water, not frozen. And then they would get picked up at the earliest possible time by different relief ships. That was the idea. There were also prior expeditions that had left stuff. Some of it would have been bad, some of it was good, but the idea was that there was going to be some food and some supplies, like bags to sleep in and clothes and stuff, because it was pretty hard on them. And they had dogs and sleds to kind of take them places. But this is a very inhospitable area. We're talking negative. Right today it is 20 degrees while I'm filming this. Feels like 13 degrees. And I can't imagine it being 90 degrees lower than it is now, Fahrenheit, to negative 70. But they were dealing with that kind of stuff. So that was the plan. And the first year, everything went fine. Pretty low number of injuries. And this is 1881. An injury in this kind of inhospitable place could spell death. So, they had to be very careful. This is not like where I am, walking on flat terrain. These are giant 20, 30, 40-foot ice flows that go straight up, and you have to go around them, and it's very hard to just deal with. So, first year went fine. They're getting all the measurements. There's a little bit of tension with some of the members of the expedition, but generally pretty good. Now, they are supposed to be resupplied by a ship called the Neptune. Oh, I should mention everyone in this expedition is either civilian or Army, mostly Army. So no one really has any idea about nautical principles, navigation, anything like that. And that's important. It becomes more important because even the resupply is done with Army people, and you don't want to do that. It's kind of my takeaway. So the first ship that's supposed to come in is the Neptune. The Neptune is loaded with, I forget how many pounds of food, but it's something like 50,000 or 10,000. I don't know. A lot. There's a lot. A ration is basically for one person for a day. So it's got something like 10,000 or 50,000 rations or something like that. It's going to get them through for a couple years. Well, it runs into some ice. And it could have stashed some of the rations at different areas like Cape Sabine or this Littleton Island. But instead, it drops like 250 rations. This is for 25 people. So if you want to do the math, that's basically 10 days if they're eating full rations. Eventually, they would have to cut back on the rations anyway because they're running out of food. So they have the ship decides that it can't make it up to resupply certain areas. It doesn't really follow the instructions, and it leaves like 250 rations total, and none of the other supplies that they needed. But the idea was, well, they have plenty of food at Fort Conger. There's going to be another ship the next year, and they go back and report like, hey, we weren't successful in all of this, but it left with like most of the rations, like a vast majority of the rations were still on the ship. Could have left them, it didn't. And that was by a guy named BB. BB. Not like what my daughter calls her grandma. A year goes by. They're starting to feel it, but they're like, okay, well, we know a ship's coming soon. So we should get it. This is now 1883, because 1881 was the first, or 1882 was the first resupply attempt. Didn't happen. 1883 is when they're supposed to leave, so they know a ship should be coming up. They're looking for open leads in the ice for ships to come up. There are two ships that are coming, the Yannick and the Proteus. Proteus is the ship that dropped them off in the first place, and it's being headed by a first lieutenant in the Army with a lieutenant from the Navy helping, and Yanis is the tender ship that's going to be there just to provide support. They have a plan. There's delays. They leave really late in the season, and they have to stop on the way up at different ports, and they get a really late start, but they are operating under the idea that they're going to have all these opportunities, and that the first trip that Proteus took was the norm, where really it was like when they first dropped off these guys, the Greely Expedition, it was like it was the best possible scenario for the ship, and it was not the norm. So they were kind of operating thinking that it was going to be like that again, and it wasn't. It was more typical. They got a slow start, a late start, and eventually they're going up. Now the Yannick is not reinforced for Arctic work, so it stays back further south, and the Proteus heads north, gets stuck in the ice, and in a very short time is crushed. The crew from the Proteus, which is a mix of servicemen from the Army, one Navy person, and then whaler, sealer crews from Canada, they abandoned ship. They have this long, arduous escape further down the coast. They almost die. It's really harrowing. Somehow they make it. They get picked up by the Yannick because there's all these plans of like, if you don't see us by this date, go here. If you don't see us here, go there, whatever. There's a lot of that. So they're kind of doing that approach. And then they find them. They find the crew that was from the Proteus. They pick them up. Now, they could have left supplies. Proteus could have left supplies on the way up to where they got stuck, but they didn't. So they've lost all these supplies. They've lost all these building materials that the Greely Expedition could have used to build a second fort closer to where they could get picked up by a ship. And they head south with their tails between their legs, realizing that they failed too. Now, we're 2 years out from when they were dropped off, and it's going to freeze over again. So they can't try again until year number 3, 1884. And there is a lot of negativity from the Secretary of War, Robert Todd Lincoln, whatever. Because it's embarrassing because they've had a number of failures. So he is not thrilled about helping, but they need to. This is an official expedition to map and gather data from the Arctic region. Greely's wife, Henrietta, is pushing, using all of her contacts to push for a rescue. There's a congressional inquiry into why there were failures before, and they know that this is going to be dangerous for the crew. Meanwhile, the Greely Expedition had written orders that basically if they got to year 3, they would start to head south looking for a ship. So they are heading from Fort Conger, which they probably still have food for, but probably are too far north to be rescued unless the sea state is optimal for transiting through that area, but it's not because it's packed with ice. They head about 500 miles south to Cape Sabine. This is not a smooth trek. It is dangerous. They are looking for food that they thought would have been stashed at these different cairns. None of them are. They haven't been resupplied at all. And then they tuck in to Cape Sabine for another winter, and by now they are running out of food. They're trying to hunt, but the problem is, in the winter, all the animals head south. Not super far south, but much further south than they are. The ice freezes over on the sea, so they can't really have access to seals or walruses, which have also gone south. Caribou, everything else is going out of the area. So they run out of food options. They have some food left. They also thought there were going to be some stashes in these other areas from earlier expeditions, but either they've gone bad or they've been ransacked by animals, or there's just not that much food there that's nutritious. They start to worry about scurvy. People start to kind of lose their mind a little bit, which has been slowly creeping up on them with the long winters, the dark long winters where there's no sun. Just the exposure to the elements too. A lot of issues with frostbite, extreme frostbite, and that's not even including just the regular wear and tear on the body, and they're climbing up stuff, so they might be twisting ankles or getting hurt, and then how do they treat that? And we're used to short distances here, like get in the car, drive somewhere, but you're not walking 50 miles. And they're having to walk 50 miles. They've left the dogs behind, so they don't have the sledges. If they're going to move huge supplies, they're doing it by strapping people to these sledges and then making them march, basically, which is also tiring. So they're starting to die. They die really quickly, too. I mean, not really quickly. They die, like, once people start to die, it starts to speed up. I think maybe some of that's a little mental. But also their bodies are experiencing the same degradation throughout their time there. And I think they all kind of hit their limit, except for one guy, Private Henry, who was stealing food and is eventually executed. Now, when I approached this book, I thought that Greely must have really screwed up and that he must have been full of himself and that people suffered because of that. But what I found from reading this is that Greely did what he was supposed to do. Like he had some hopes to reach the North Pole and to be the farthest north and that kind of thing. But he did not take big chances, and he followed the plan. And a lot of the failure for the expedition came from the supporting roles of the ships not making it, not even trying, not really planning for the worst case scenario for the people. They were kind of happy on their ship and headed back out, and they're like, well, somebody else will deal with this. But that's not not the right way to do that. So it was really, I think, everyone else's fault. BB, the first resupply attempt, was attacked pretty heavily in the public eye. He wanted to go and help again. They said no. He eventually killed himself with laudanum. He was drinking a lot too, but he killed himself with laudanum. Other people that failed other times, they also wanted to get involved, but they weren't allowed to. What ended up happening was, because of Henrietta's persistence and a few other people, Kuzan, I think, General Kuzan, one of the lieutenants' fathers was a general, Lockwood. They eventually, and I think a lot of this was also the public pressure, organized a relief expedition that was going to be headed by the Department of the Navy instead of the Department of War, which is Army. And Schley, a commander, captain, in the Navy, was going to head it up. It was basically, they had three main ships. The Thetis was the flagship. It was a purchased sealer that was built in Dundee, Scotland, and was really built for Arctic work. The Bear, which if you've watched my other review with Commander Kyle, that's the Bear. This is the same Bear. This is the Bear that would eventually go on to work in the U.S. Revenue Cutter Service and the U.S. Coast Guard. It was originally a sealer, also from Scotland, from Dundee, Scotland. The ships were refitted and reinforced for Arctic work, and really were the two great ones. The UK Queen Victoria volunteered the HMS Alert, which also joined them, and then there was the Loch Garry, which was kind of their tender ship, the support. And then there was also a $25,000 reward offered for any non-government ships that found or led to the rescue of the Greely Expedition, which got a bunch of sealers and whalers involved. So all these sealers and whalers were heading there, and the good thing was they really knew what they were doing, and they were used to this area, so they helped out a lot. Some of them peeled off eventually, and some went pretty far north with the official rescue operation, but they peeled off too. So you really have the Thetis and the Bear working their way up. Eventually the Bear's the one that got there first with its small ship, kind of motorized cutter, the Cub. And they stopped at a bunch of different places on the way up. Eventually were far enough north that they caught the information. They caught letters left behind by Greely's men and worked their way up and found them. In the nick of time. They would have had, within the day, some people would have died. Within a couple days, probably the rest would have died. They were so close to death. And they were not even being able to bury people anymore. They were just kind of strewn out in their area near the cemetery that they had built. Got really lucky. Out of the 25, 6 were picked up. One of them was, I think, Ellis. And he had both legs amputated, and his hands, they tied a spoon so he could feed himself, even though they were feeding for a while. He died shortly after they were rescued. Everyone else lived. Eventually, they made it back. Huge war. Like, there was fanfare. They were rescued. Then there were their stories that maybe there was some cannibalism involved. Never really resolved. Maybe there was. I'm not going to judge that. Like, this is extreme situations. They're fighting for their lives. It's not like they were killing to be cannibals. There may have been some cannibalism involved, just trying to live. That's not abnormal. It happened with the Donner Party. I've done a review for a Donner Party book. Let's check that out. It's happened in other situations too. So this is not abnormal. Whale ship Essex did it. I have let's check that out. Heart of the Sea. There's some cannibalism there. It happens. but there's nothing definite that it definitely happened. There were just rumors of it. Eventually, though, people turned and they realized like this is an amazing story. Yeah, the original expedition was not a failure. Like they kept all of their data and stuff. That went well, but just the fact that people died was not a great thing. And in the end, I think Greely came out looking pretty good. He survived. He eventually made Major General, became the Chief Signal Officer for the Army. Now that I've read it, I don't blame him for really anything. I think he did a good job. He was a good leader. He was dealing with some pretty difficult people, difficult situations, and they made the best of it. And really, if it wasn't for that, they probably would have died much sooner. All of them probably, instead of just the ones who did die. So all in all, great book. Buddy Levy has written a few other books that I want to read, including one called Empire of Ice and Stone, I think is what it's called. And it deals with a ship that is wrecked in, I think, 1914, and Bear makes another appearance. So I will be doing a review for that. I'll read that and do a review for that in the future, but it's just kind of, it's cool to see Bear show up. I did my last review, I had Bear in it with Commander Kyle. This one has Bear in it. This is really the first introduction of Bear to these kind of rescue operations, and of course we'll see it do more later too. So I really like this book. That was really well written, really interesting, kept you engrossed. And the weird thing was, like, you knew what was going to happen. Like, it's not hard to find out what happens to these people, but you still were like, come on, get there, save them, come on, get there. You gotta hurry up, you're taking too much time, you're starting out too late. But in the end, like, you know that only 5 of them are going to survive, and that everyone else is going to die, and there's going to be all these delays. But still, you're, like, rooting for it not to happen that way. So, yep. That's kind of the way things were, though. It was a very dangerous time. It's still dangerous, but it was very dangerous then. And, that's it. So I will talk to you later. Have a good one. Thanks for being here. Stay safe. Stay warm. And I will talk to you later. Have a good one. Bye.